A man can now satisfy his desire with the porn fairy, but the cost is high. It turns people into objects, relationships into transactions, and love into consumption. One of the most important choices in life is the choice of a partner. Yet today that decision is already being shaped, even determined, by one of the most destructive forces of our age. And the result? Depression, anxiety, and isolation often follow. Rejection, once feared, is meant to teach us strength, the very path that transforms boys into men, desire into love, and struggle into wisdom. Stick with us until the end to see the truth behind the mask of innocent entertainment and discover how one of the most ancient descriptions of hell is being lived out in modern society. There is a habit spreading quietly through several generations, a habit that imitates connection, but expands emptiness. It promises intimacy, but delivers isolation. It offers pleasure, but steals purpose. What once was a sacred act of love is now being turned into a cold, mechanical procedure, consumed through glowing screens and forgotten minutes later. This is more than a private struggle. It is shaping an entire culture, breaking families, weakening relationships, and numbing souls. Behind the curtain of digital temptation lies an industry of exploitation, where human dignity is traded for profit and people are used, sold, and discarded. Yet even in the darkest chains, there is hope. For no chain is unbreakable when truth, courage, and the Spirit of God enter the story. The same habit that enslaves can become the battle that transforms your life. The question is not whether freedom is possible. It is whether you are willing to step into it. Digital temptation offers satisfaction without commitment. It gives the appearance of intimacy without the weight of responsibility. What once required courage, growth, and sacrifice can now be simulated with a few taps on a screen. But that very convenience is what makes it dangerous. Jordan Peterson has spoken about Peter Pan, the boy who refuses to grow up, and he links this refusal to modern habits of escapism. If a man can satisfy his desire with the porn fairy Tinkerbell, as Peterson provocatively puts it, why would he strive to become the kind of man capable of winning real love? Sex is meant to be a powerful motivator, pushing men and women alike to grow, to become stronger, to build families, to create stability, so they can pass through the gates of love and parenthood. But when the reward can be taken instantly without effort, the motivation collapses. On adult platforms, people are shown experiences that are far beyond what they will ever encounter in real life. This sets up impossible standards. The target moves higher and higher. The limits of what is considered acceptable sink lower and lower, and soon, reality itself feels inadequate. It is as if the soul is staring at Plato's cave wall, confusing shadows for reality. But no one can live in fantasy forever. Not you, not me, not even Peter Pan. Because the clock inside the crocodile's stomach keeps ticking. Time pulls us all forward. And when most people are finally forced out of the dark cave of illusions, they discover painfully that the real world is nothing like the pictures on the wall. The damage is not only psychological but physical. Neuroscience shows that the brain stops releasing normal levels of dopamine and oxytocin without the intense artificial stimulation that digital illusions provide. Just as a drug user needs more and more to feel the same high, so too does the soul hooked on false intimacy. Withdrawal sets in, leaving emptiness, anxiety, and even depression. What should have been a source of joy, the natural bond between two people, becomes dulled, even broken. The Bible already warned of this truth. Proverbs 27:20 says, Hell and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. The eyes that endlessly scan for stimulation will never find peace. St. Augustine confessed of his own youthful passions, "The mind commands the body and it obeys. The mind commands itself and resists." He knew the trap of desire, craving what brings no true fulfillment. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us." His point was simple: we settle for shadows when the reality of divine love is calling. And Jordan Peterson, though speaking from psychology, echoes the same warning. When men trade real relationships for fantasy, they sacrifice their future, their growth, and their very capacity for love. Human beings are explorers by nature. From the moment we stood upright, we crossed seas, built cities, climbed mountains, and even reached the stars. Curiosity is in our blood. But in the age of digital temptation, this same impulse has been hijacked. Instead of exploring the world, millions explore endless digital illusions. Studies suggest that well over 70% of young men and more than 50% of young women under 25 have been exposed to adult content on the internet, many before they even understood what they were watching. The average first exposure happens before the age of 13. This is not exploration anymore. It is exploitation. And here is the truth that few want to admit. No one can watch adult content without contributing, even indirectly, to modern slavery. Behind the scenes of polished images and staged performances lies a darker reality: trafficking, coercion, and broken human lives. Economists and watchdog groups have pointed out that a significant portion of what circulates online is tied to exploitation. People who never chose freely or who were trapped by poverty, manipulation, or outright abuse. Every click becomes a thread in a web that keeps this machine alive. Modern culture tries to normalize it. People say it's harmless, just part of growing up. But let's be honest, there is nothing normal about a teenager secretly watching this material in their room. There is nothing harmless in letting the most powerful forces of desire be shaped, distorted, and chained, before a soul has even grown into adulthood. What begins in secrecy becomes a lifelong pattern of enslavement. It will affect relationships, marriages, and even the ability to raise children with trust and stability. One of the most important choices in any person's life is the choice of a life partner. Yet for many today, that choice is already being shaped, even determined by one of the most destructive and dividing forces of our modern world. Instead of learning from the wisdom of elders, instead of observing successful marriages and drawing strength from traditions that have stood the test of time, young people search for porn fairies in real life. They begin to measure themselves and others against a fantasy that was never meant to exist, trying to look like those illusions, perform like them, and live up to a script written not for love but for profit. Is it any wonder that so many families fall apart? How could trust remain when one partner is comparing the other to a fantasy that no human can embody? How could young men grow into husbands when they have been trained to seek pleasure without sacrifice? How could young women grow into wives when they are pressured to imitate impossible ideals? The family is being broken, not by war or famine, but by the quiet poison of distorted desire. The Apostle Paul warned in Romans 1, verse 25, "They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator." This is exactly what happens when desire is detached from love. St. John Chrysostom wrote, "The fire of lust, once it has seized the soul, is more tyrannical than any master." The lie of the modern world is that you can stay detached, that you can watch, indulge, and remain unaffected. But the truth is that no one remains untouched. Every glance, every secret habit, shapes the soul. And when the soul is shaped by lies, the truth about love and marriage is slowly erased. Scripture is clear. Jesus said in John chapter 8, verse 34, "Everyone who sins is a slave to sin." At first, the chain feels light, a whisper of curiosity, a harmless indulgence. But with every repetition, it grows thicker. The will weakens, the mind becomes divided, and what once felt like a choice begins to feel like destiny. It is slavery, not freedom. The fathers of the church spoke of lust as a tyrant. Why? Because it does not only command your actions, it reshapes your very way of seeing the world. It turns people into objects, relationships into transactions, and love into consumption. And when that vision takes root, it blinds the soul to God, who is love himself. But the chain is not only spiritual, it is also physical. Modern neuroscience shows us how. Each time a person indulges in digital temptation, the brain floods with dopamine, the same chemical surge that comes with drugs, gambling, or alcohol. But unlike natural intimacy, which bonds people together through oxytocin and long-term satisfaction, artificial stimulation leaves only a crash. The brain begins to adapt, reducing its sensitivity. What once satisfied no longer does, and so the person seeks more intense, more shocking, more extreme. This is why the standards sink lower and lower, and why people seek things they once would have found unthinkable. It is the law of tolerance, the same mechanism behind every addiction. Withdrawal follows. When the screen is gone, the mind craves stimulation. Yet ordinary life feels dull, gray, meaningless. The brain refuses to release the normal levels of hormones that bring joy and connection without the dramatic spike it has been trained to expect. It is like a man lost in the desert, unable to taste water because his tongue has been burned. Depression, anxiety, and isolation often follow, not because life is empty, but because the nervous system has been tricked into rejecting its own natural rhythms. This explains why so many who try to quit speak of despair, irritability, even physical symptoms. It is not weakness, it is chemistry. Yet the chemistry is not final. Just as pathways are wired through repetition, they can be rewired through renewal. Paul wrote in Romans 12, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Renewal is possible, but it requires endurance, because the body resists. The tragedy is that what God designed to motivate us toward growth, sexual desire that pushes men and women to improve themselves, to seek marriage, to build families, has been hijacked. Instead of spurring effort, it collapses into passivity. Instead of driving exploration of the real world, it traps people in a cycle of shadows. The chain is both spiritual and physical, and it does not break easily. But the first step is to see it for what it is. Not freedom, not pleasure, but slavery. One of the most important lessons a young person must learn, especially a young man, is rejection. You feel desire, you grow hopes and expectations, and then you face the reality of being turned down. At first it feels like disaster, like the world is collapsing. But in time, rejection becomes part of the process. It teaches humility, it teaches resilience, it forces you to adjust, to improve, to recognize the difference between what you want and what you truly need. Every no sharpens the soul toward the right yes. But illusions never reject you. The digital fantasy always says yes, always responds instantly, always delivers what you want, without cost, without risk, without growth. And that is why it is so dangerous. It feels safe, but it is a false safety. When the time finally comes to step out of the cave of shadows and pursue real relationships, the person who has lived in fantasy is unprepared. Real relationships require courage, effort, and yes, rejection. Without that training, the first real no feels unbearable. What should have been part of the journey becomes trauma. Instead of trying again, many retreat back into the cave because it is easier to live with illusions than to face the pain that builds strength. This is why so many today remain stuck. They want love, they want family, but they cannot face the path that leads to it. And so they repeat the cycle, craving what they cannot find, fearing the very process that would teach them how to receive it. But freedom is possible. It begins with honesty, naming the chain and admitting that the cave is not reality. There is an ancient description of hell that speaks directly to this struggle. Imagine a place where every joy of life is offered in abundance, but no desire is ever satisfied. Food that does not nourish, drink that does not quench, love that never fulfills. And the more you take, the stronger your craving becomes. This is the torment of endless consumption without peace. Digital temptation is a shadow of that reality. The more you indulge, the more restless you become. The momentary satisfaction only deepens the emptiness. And what looks like pleasure slowly becomes slavery. Hell is not only a future place of punishment, it begins in the soul here and now, when we train ourselves to crave endlessly what can never satisfy. James 5:16 says, "Confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed." Healing requires bringing what is hidden into the light. Secrecy is the fuel of the chain. Confession is the beginning of freedom. The second step is to starve the chain. You cannot fight temptation while feeding it. This means practical choices, filters, limits, changing routines, breaking triggers. Jesus said in Matthew 5:29, "If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away." His words are not about mutilation, but about radical action. The third step is replacement. You cannot empty your life and leave it bare. You must fill it with truth, with love, with real purpose, relationships, community, exercise, meaningful work, prayer. These are not distractions but weapons. Every new pattern becomes a brick in the path to freedom. And finally, freedom requires endurance. You will stumble, you will feel cravings, you may fall, but each time you rise, you grow stronger. Proverbs 24:16 reminds us, "The righteous fall 7 times and rise again." God does not demand perfection before He accepts you. He calls you to persistence. In the end, rejection itself becomes the teacher. Every no you face in life is not a wall, but a doorway. Illusions cannot give you that. Only reality can. And reality, as harsh as it may seem, is where growth lives. St. John Chrysostom said, "No man can be harmed except by himself." The real harm is not rejection, not struggle, not failure. The real harm is refusing to step out of the cave, refusing to face life, and settling for shadows. Freedom begins when you accept rejection as part of the journey, when you stop fearing it and start using it to grow. That is how boys become men, how desire is shaped into love, and how chains are broken. But this is not only an individual battle. Society as a whole must take responsibility. If alcohol, gambling, and other addictive substances require restrictions, why should digital illusions that enslave the mind and soul remain unguarded? It is not a matter of shaming or exposing those already struggling. It is about protecting the young before the chain ever forms. No child should be introduced to such distortions before they are even capable of forming real relationships. For this reason, governments should be pressured to enforce stricter rules. Access to adult material should require verified identification with a minimum age of 21, not because adults are immune, but because children deserve a chance to grow without being poisoned at the very roots of their desire. St. Paul warned in 1 Corinthians 6:12, "All things are lawful for me, but I will not be enslaved by anything." A free society does not exist, where its youngest members are quietly chained before they reach maturity. This is not about morality police. It is about giving children and teenagers the gift of innocence, the time to grow strong enough to face the world without being enslaved by it from the start. Every generation deserves that chance. And if governments can restrict substances that harm the body, they must also be willing to restrict content that enslaves the soul. In the end, this struggle is not only about habits, not only about culture, not even about science. It is about your soul and the story your life will tell. You were not created to live in a cave of shadows, feeding on illusions. You were created for love, for truth, for connection. And that means you have a choice. Jesus said in John chapter 8, verse 32, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Freedom is not the absence of desire. It is the transformation of desire. It is the shift from consuming shadows to seeking the light. It is the moment you stop chasing what can never satisfy and begin to receive what was meant for you from the very beginning. Real love, rooted in God. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 2, "You yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts, known and read by everyone." Your life itself is meant to be a testimony, a living letter, written not with fantasy, but with reality. Every step you take toward freedom rewrites that letter. Every act of courage tells a new story. The question is not whether freedom is possible. Countless men and women have walked this path before you and found healing, joy, and new strength. The real question is whether you will choose it, whether you will step out of secrecy, confess your struggle, take the hard road of rejection, and allow God to turn your wounds into wisdom. St. Augustine, who knew the chains of lust more than most, once prayed, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." That rest is waiting, not in illusion, not in shadows, but in Him. So here is the choice before you. Remain in the cave, watching the flickering images on the wall, or step into the light and learn what real love is. Remain enslaved to chains that tighten with every indulgence, or walk into freedom, scarred perhaps, but stronger, wiser, and able to love. If this message stirred something in you, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who's ready to stop drifting and start living with purpose.